Hi there. Today I want to talk about wild animal suffering. So the reason why I want to talk about this topic is because it's an ethical minefield where we encounter a lot of moral illusions. So I will use this example of wild animal suffering as a case study to explain a lot of moral illusions, or what psychologists call cognitive biases. So what I want to argue is that there's a lot of suffering in nature, and we should start doing scientific research in order to intervene in nature to improve animal well-being. So we have to find effective, safe technologies that allow us to intervene in nature to improve well-being of all sentient animals. So let's start with what is the problem of wild animal suffering. If you hear a bird singing outside, then it looks nice. It's a nice evening in spring. The animal seems happy, satisfied, everything seems nice, but you have to be aware of an important moral mistake, a spontaneous error in our way of thinking about animal suffering in nature that leads us to underestimate this suffering. So we incorrectly think that the animals in nature have a good life because we basically, when we see animals, we see the healthy animals. So for every bird that we hear singing, there are basically tens of other young chickens, birds, that we could not see. Why not? Because they died before they could sing. They died in their first few days. So a lot of newborn animals in nature have miserable lives, very short lives full of negative experiences, hunger, thirst, diseases, and at the end of their short lives they have a death struggle from predators, parasites, things like that. Often a slow death. So what we can say is, if you would reincarnate, you would be born again, and you will be randomly selected, be born as a new sentient being on Earth, randomly chosen. Most likely you will have a life with a lot of negative experiences. A short life, a very short life of, let's say, a few days, with most of your experiences are hunger, disease, thirst, and things like that. So that means we basically underestimate wild animal suffering. So now there is a growing group of animal rights activists. They associate themselves with the effective altruism movement, and they start to think about this issue of wild animal suffering, and they become more and more in favor of intervening. But we all know at this moment we do not have safe, effective, cost-effective interventions how we can improve animal well-being. So the idea is that we should start doing scientific research. We already have an academic discipline called conservation biology that does research about how we can most effectively promote and conserve biodiversity. But there is not yet an academic discipline that studies how we can most effectively promote and conserve well-being, animal well-being. So that's the basic argument. We should start doing scientific research, set up this new academic discipline, which we can call welfare biology, in contrast to conservation biology. And so welfare biology looks for effective, safe techniques that we can apply in the future. And this might be a very effective kind of research, because once we have those techniques, we can apply them for the rest of the future for thousands of generations, and each generation has billions of suffering animals. So we can help literally billions of animals in the far, far future. So that's worthy investment. If you look at it from an effective altruist perspective, start doing this welfare biology research. So the basic problem that we face in nature is what I explained with the birds. It's called R selection. That's a reproductive strategy. Most animals, birds, mice, and so on, they have a lot of offspring. So a lot of babies. And so let's say they have 10 babies and only one of them can survive to reproductive age. Yeah. So a bird that's lays 10 eggs, and only one egg will result in a bird that survives to reproductive age. So what happens with the 9 other newborn birds? Yeah, that's the question. They all die prematurely. They have lives probably not worth living, with an overall lifetime well-being probably negative, with more negative experiences than positive experiences. So that's R selection. In contrast, the R selection, the R refers to rate of growth. So they have a reproductive strategy to maximize the rate of growth of their population, maximize the number of offspring, and then a lot of offspring will die, because one adult can, on average, can get only one surviving offspring. And on the other hand, we have a K selection. K refers to kind of carrying capacity in population biology. K selection reproductive strategy is what happens with a lot of large animals, whales or elephants, for example, or humans. With humans, it's a clearest example. 2 parents on average get 2 or 3 offspring, children, and most of the children, human children, survive. Even in poor countries, most of the children survive to a reproductive age. So in terms of well-being, that's probably positive. If you can survive, you probably have a lot of positive experiences. So that's the difference. The biggest problem in nature is this R selection, the reproductive strategy where animals get a lot of offsprings and 99 out of 100 offspring die, for example. That's the real tragedy in nature. Now, if you look at a lot of animal rights activists, not those affiliated with the effective altruism community, a lot of animal rights activists ironically are against this idea of intervening in nature to improve animal welfare. And here is the area where a lot of moral illusions or cognitive biases pop up. So I will give a lot of examples now, arguments that some animal rights activists say in order to defend their position that we should not intervene in nature to improve well-being. One of their complaints is that intervening in nature violates the autonomy of animals. That's an argument that's heard by some, promoted by some animal rights activists. Now, the contrary is true, because imagine that you are an animal, an average animal, randomly selected in nature. Most likely you will have hunger and diseases, and you will feel very weak, and you will have a very short life. Okay. Now, if you have a disease and you feel very, very weak, how is this contributing to your autonomy? Your autonomy means that you can do things that you want to do, but if you're very weak and ill, you basically do not have autonomy. It's like if you're a human and you're in bed all day, there's not much autonomy. To make it more clear, where is the autonomy of a prey animal in the claws of a predator, a carnivorous predator? Animal rights activists are against imprisonment of animals, against captivity, keeping animals in captivity in dolphinaria, in zoos, circuses, livestock, factory farms, and so on. So they're against captivity, but why is the capture of a prey animal by a lion, for example, not a very bad kind of captivity. Where is your freedom or your liberty when you're literally in the claws and the mouth of a predator? So that's not contributing to autonomy either. Another objection against intervening in nature is that we should respect or conserve naturalness, the natural order, biodiversity, or integrity of ecosystems. And intervening in nature violates this idea of naturalness. So this is again a cognitive bias, a naturalistic bias, because if you look at it, an ecosystem or a natural reserve does not have a consciousness, does not have experiences, does not have preferences, does not have a will. Okay, so an ecosystem does not concern itself about its integrity or naturalness or biodiversity. It doesn't care about it. It's a blind process happening there. It's like with a painting. A painting does not have a consciousness and is not does not care about its artistic value. Yeah, if you have a work of art, the piece of art itself does not care about artistic value or the beauty. Values like beauty are not a concern of the painting. And the same goes for ecosystems. So we can attribute value to biodiversity, just like we can attribute an aesthetic value to a painting, a piece of art. But the ecosystems do not care about this value that we attribute. On the other hand, the animals in nature, they value well-being. So we can attribute a value to well-being of animals, but here we can say that the animals themselves also value their biodiversity, their well-being. They care about their well-being, they want to improve their well-being, they experience their well-being. So that's a big difference with an ecosystem not experiencing biodiversity, not caring about integrity, versus an animal caring about its own well-being, experiencing welfare feelings. So if we say that we should not intervene in nature because we have to respect naturalness or integrity, basically that means that our own projected values, the values that we project on nature, our value of integrity or biodiversity, we consider them as more important than the values of what the animals care about. Yeah. So if you want to respect autonomy of ecosystems, well, an ecosystem does not have preferences, so respecting autonomy is always trivially satisfied. But the animals, on the other hand, they care about things, so we also have to respect the autonomy of the animals. So the animals care about their well-being. They do not care about naturalness or integrity of ecosystems. They care about well-being. Their own well-being, the well-being of their offspring, that's what they care about. So we should not, in order to respect autonomy, we should not say that our own projected preferences, that the values that we project on nature, are more important than the personal preferences that the sentient beings in nature have. Yeah. So it's kind of arrogant to say that my projected value of integrity or biodiversity, I value the biodiversity of an ecosystem, my projected value of biodiversity is more important than the personal values of the animals. So in that sense, as effective altruists, we have to avoid this naturalistic bias. If nature doesn't care about natural order or integrity, then altruists shouldn't care about it either. If animals care about well-being, altruists should care about their well-being as well. So we should consistently care about what the others want. We should care about what ecosystems want, but it happens that ecosystems don't care about anything because they do not have a consciousness, they don't have experiences. Another objection, often raised by animal rights activists, is that we have to make a distinction between suffering caused by humans versus suffering caused by non-human nature. Yeah? So that suffering caused by humans in livestock farming, factory farms for example, is worse than suffering in nature, not where there was no intervention by humans, where humans did not play a causal role in the suffering. Now this is clearly a speciesism bias. So that's not a cognitive bias, a kind of discrimination on the basis of species. And this is very ironic because animal rights activists, they are against speciesism. It's very clear to see why this is speciesism, because their principle clearly refers to humans. They make a distinction between human-caused suffering and non-human caused suffering. So their principle, their moral principle, contains or refers to the notion of humans. And yeah, if that's not a clear example of speciesism, I don't know what is. So the animals themselves, if you want to be altruistic, we have to consider what the animals prefer and want, but the animals themselves, they don't care about whether or not their suffering is caused by humans or by non-humans. They simply care about avoiding suffering. They don't care about the real cause of suffering. So if they don't make this distinction between human and non-human caused suffering, then effective altruists and animal rights activists should not care about it either. So if vegans, for example, vegans are not responsible for the suffering of animals in factory farms, because vegans do not consume products from factory farms. They are not causally responsible. Now, still, vegan animal rights activists say that we have to stop intervene and stop factory farming. Now, it doesn't make sense that those same vegans would say that we should not intervene in nature, with the reason that we are not causally responsible for the suffering in nature, because vegans are also not causally responsible for the suffering in livestock farming. So still, if vegans believe that we have to prevent suffering in livestock farming, even if we're not responsible, then we should also prevent suffering in nature, even if we are not responsible. Let's move to another cognitive bias. That's basically the status quo bias. So the argument against intervening in nature goes as follows. It says that the actual current natural equilibrium in nature happens to be the one that maximizes well-being. So there are natural equilibria in nature. Well, in the sense that there are no equilibria on large time scales, because there is always evolution and random processes and so on. But on some human time scales, where you consider humans as a reference, a lot of humans perceive kind of natural equilibria in ecosystems. In ecosystems that are left alone, like a forest, a climax forest system. Now, if you look at the natural equilibrium, if that exists, suppose it exists, you can say that this equilibrium is it has parameters. It has a level of biodiversity, a level of competition, a level of predation. So there are parameters that define the natural equilibrium. Yeah, and if you change the parameters, the equilibrium shifts. Yeah, it can move to another equilibrium. If we drastically decrease biodiversity, you will move the ecosystem towards another equilibrium, for example. Now suppose that you're against intervening in nature, against decreasing the level of competition and predation. So suppose we want to decrease predation and competition in nature. The argument goes as follows: if you decrease predation, then more prey animals will survive, and there will be an overpopulation of prey animals, then they will die from hunger and starvation. So that's not good for well-being either, and a lot of prey animals will get more diseases, because the predators, they kill the sick, the ill, the animals who are ill. Now, if you believe that decreasing the level of competition and predation in nature is not a good idea, then to detect status quo bias, we can do a reversal test. What about increasing the level of competition and predation? What if we increase the numbers of predators? What if we introduced new predator species in an ecosystem? Would that then improve well-being? Now, then the argument goes, if you increase the level of predation, more prey animals will be killed, and being killed by a predator is not nice, it causes suffering, so suffering again will increase. So increasing level of predation and competition are not good, effective interventions to improve well-being either. So that means that you believe that the current natural level, the equilibrium level of predation and competition, happens to be the one that maximizes well-being. And there is no reason to believe this, because this current level of predation and competition, these levels are set by blind processes of evolution, of natural selection, natural processes that do not care about animal well-being. Yeah? So evolution does not care about well-being. The level of predation is not fine-tuned to be that level where aggregate animal well-being in nature is maximized. So if you have no reason to believe that the current level of predation is the one that maximizes well-being, and if you are not in favor of increasing the level of predation, introducing new predator species to improve well-being, if you're not in favor of that either, then why are you against decreasing the level of predation? That's the basic question then. And it reveals a cognitive bias. A final cognitive bias that I want to raise is kind of scope insensitivity bias. So the idea is with animals, predators, carnivorous predators or obligatory carnivorous, they have to hunt and eat animals in order to survive. It's for their survival. It's a vital need to kill animals. So here we can first ask the question, like in other areas, most animal rights activists do not believe that we are allowed to kill and sacrifice someone else against, use their bodies against their will for your own vital needs. For example, the famous dilemma in bioethics. Suppose in hospital there are 5 patients, they need new organs, otherwise they will die, there's an organ shortage. Are you allowed to sacrifice an innocent person against his or her will and use 5 of his organs, kidneys, spleen, liver, things like that, to save the 5 patients? Looking at the consequences, it's 1 person dead and 5 people saved, so net you have saved 4 people. So the consequences would be good, but looking at the rights, you can say that a very fundamental right, the right to bodily autonomy of this innocent person, is violated. And this right to bodily autonomy can be very strong. It can basically be much stronger than the right to be saved, for example, the right to live. And so that's what a lot of animal rights activists believe. We are not allowed to sacrifice an innocent person, not even for the vital needs of 5 other people. Yeah? 1 person dead, 5 people saved. Now, those same animal rights activists, they believe that 1 predator is allowed to kill, to sacrifice, to hunt 100 other prey animals, kill them, use their bodies, their body tissues, against their will, violates the right of bodily autonomy of those prey animals. Use their muscle tissue, like organ tissue, put it in your own body in order for yourself to survive. And they believe it's not allowed, not even if 1 predator kills hundreds. animals. One lion kills 100 zebras, for example. Why would that be the case? And here there's a kind of a scope insensitivity bias, because the claim often heard is that a predator is allowed to kill someone else in order to survive. It's a life for a life, one life for another life. That may seem reasonable, but it's not really the case. It's one life for 100 lives, sacrificing 100 lives to save only one life. So scope insensitivity bias says that we do not properly take into account the scope. So the scope of the death of 1,000 prey animals and the rights violations of 1,000 prey animals should be, let's say, 1,000 times higher than the death of one predator. So if during its lifespan a predator kills 1,000 prey animals, you have to give a very, very, very good argument why one predator is allowed to violate this fundamental right to bodily autonomy of thousands of prey animals. So to conclude, we see that even a lot of animal rights activists are vulnerable to moral illusions or cognitive biases. Moral illusions are often spontaneous judgments that are erroneous. They violate our deepest moral values. They are in contradiction with our strongest moral intuitions and values, our strongest moral principles. They distract us away from a rational ethic. So when it comes to wild animal suffering, even a lot of animal rights activists who claim to be anti-speciesist become speciesist. Because for the simple reason that they do not want to switch the position of the suffering animal, the suffering wild animal, with a suffering child, a suffering human, for example. So if an animal is infected by a parasite or attacked by a predator, they can say that's allowed, it's not fine, but it's still not morally wrong. But if a human is attacked by a predator or infected by a parasite, that's something else. And often you hear those people, those animal rights activists, making a lot of logical fallacies or moral fallacies. They are fallacies because they are not willing to apply those same arguments when it comes to situations when children are at risk. So they are not saying like, if suppose a lion attacks a child or a parasite infects a child, they're not saying things like what a child does with the children is natural and therefore permissible because lions do not have a moral consciousness. They do not have moral brains, and they act on instinct. This is basically another funny argument because it's often claimed that what predators do in nature is morally permissible because predators are not moral agents. They are not able to understand ethics. They do not have a moral consciousness, do not understand principles, rules, laws, rights, things like that. So they act on instinct. Basically, that means that they are too stupid. If the lions would become smart enough to understand rights, to understand ethics, what would we say to the lions? Would we then say like, okay, sorry, now you're smart enough, intelligent enough to understand ethics, you become a moral agent, and moral agents are responsible for the suffering that they cause, so you should stop hunting animals. But to the lions that are too stupid, that are not able to understand rights, to them we can say, okay, it's permissible for you to harm others. That's not, that violates a lot of intuitions that we have. Another argument that you hear those animal rights activists say is about, look, if lions need meat in order to survive, so that's why they are allowed to hunt. But when it comes to hunting children, those activists, they are not easily willing to admit that those lions are allowed to hunt children. Or if children are infected by parasites, if animals in nature are affected by parasites, and I propose to intervene and save those animals and kill the parasites and help the animals, then the complaint is, okay, now you're increasing overpopulation, it disrupts the ecosystem equilibria, it has unforeseen, unwanted consequences when you intervene like that. What happens with the overpopulation of prey animals? Okay, let's translate this argument to children. Should we stop helping children, stop disinfecting children against parasites, because otherwise we might have an overpopulation? Some people believe that, but I guess there are more humane ways to avoid overpopulation, and that has to do with contraceptives. And that's how we avoid human overpopulation, using contraceptives. The same can be done with wild animals. Immunocastration, for example, can be applied to avoid prey overpopulations. So you hear a lot of arguments. Some even say, like, look, prey animals have to die from something, so why not die from parasites? Again, if you change the word prey into the word child, then most of those people are not willing to hold that position. You can hear them say, like, if you want to avoid child suffering, if you want to avoid animal suffering, the best thing is to avoid procreation and wipe out all animal wildlife. If there's no one in nature, then there's no suffering. Of course, that's true, but there's also no well-being, so it's not good to improve well-being if you kill everyone. And the same goes for children. We are against suffering of children, but we are not saying like something like, if you want to minimize child suffering, we should go for human extinction, because if humans extinct, there will be no longer any child and there will be no child suffering, so you avoid any child suffering. Of course, that's true, but you will also not promote child well-being. So we have to start doing scientific research in welfare biology, how we can improve well-being in nature. And there are a lot of hopeful prospects. We're all at the beginning of this area. One hopeful thing is, for example, the development of cultured meat or clean meat, so the production of muscle tissues without animals. So this is developed for these clean meat alternatives are developed primarily for human consumers. So humans can eat meat without having to kill animals, but we can also apply this technology to help animals in the wild. And for example, our cats, our domestic animals, our pets, we can feed them with cultured meat, and in the end, even other carnivorous predators in nature, we can feed them cultured clean meat, so that those animals do not have to hunt anymore other animals who do not like to be hunted. So the problem is not basically our lack of innovation, our lack of creativity, our lack of scientific progress. That's not basically the problem. The problem is really our cognitive biases, our moral illusions. That's the obstacle, what blocks us from improving on this area, from starting developing welfare biology, starting research. So here again, I want to make a point that primarily we have to tackle those moral illusions. We have to conquer our moral illusions, become more rational in our ethics. That's the most important thing, the first step that we have to do. And next, once we have conquered them, then we will see that starting a new academic discipline, welfare biology, starting research, becomes important, becomes effective, and then we will see what those scientific researchers will find out and will develop, and then we can apply those technologies and help billions of animals for billions of future years. Okay, that's it for this video. See you next time.